Still building every estimate from scratch or just copying past projects, you do not need to do this. This one reusable template makes your bids faster, cleaner, and way more accurate. I'm going to walk you through how it works and how it's changed the game for many contractors just like you. All right, you've taken a big step forward in building out an amazing estimating system. Getting your first template or templates installed in your estimating system is going to be a game changer. As I mentioned, it just really saves so much time and makes things so much easier. So to get your first template in place, you want it to be your biggest type of project that you do. So if you do new home builds, you want it to be a large luxury project with all the bells and whistles. If you're a renovator, maybe it's a full home remodel or whatever it may be, but you want to have the template be a really big template because it's easy to delete stuff out of the template than to add pieces in and have something too basic and then have to always add more stuff in as you go through estimates. So pick a big project and that's what you want your first template on. Then pull whatever large project you may have had in the past, use that as a starting point. So pull a past project and just you'll be modifying that to create your first template. And if you want to get something that's already built out at a very high level, you can get the template that we use. We've got a full home build estimating template with all the line items all phased out and in order with cost codes and all the, everything's in there. Check out the links in the description below. Go grab our free template for estimating. It'll get you your first template in place within seconds, and you can upload it to any project management software or use it in a spreadsheet, however you want to use it. So that's the first thing is get that first, template in place and figure out what it's going to be. Second one is your structure. So you've got your template. Now you need to structure it and you want to be very thoughtful about how the pieces are coming together, not just for you having to run through this or if you're going to, hand this off one day to another estimator or if you have an estimator already, but also how your client's going to view it. Because really you're preparing this estimate for your client. So it needs to make sense to them and it needs to have a good structure to it. So the way to get this in place is, first of all, consistency. And you're doing that by having the template, but there's whatever structure you pick, it needs to be consistent. Second thing is chronological. So I like to have chronological estimates. You start with pre-construction, and then you're going to move into, your site work, demo, if you're doing demo, foundation framing, so on and so forth, right? A to Z, start to finish, and final handover to the client. Chronological, it makes sense when you're running through a project like that. And that's the way that I like to see it. There are other ways you could do it by like rooms if you're doing a remodel and, they want a kitchen and then they want to do a sunroom or something, you can maybe break it out. But generally speaking, even with inside that structure, your smaller structure is going to be chronological. Beyond that, in those big chronological steps I mentioned, you'll divide it into either divisions by like cost codes, which I'm going to get to in a second, or phases of the project. So if you've got, certain phases that are happening in the project, those would be like the big blocks. Then within that, you've got your divisions, framing, finishing, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, whatever, right? Those are your kind of divisions. And then inside that, you'll usually have a similar structure as far as like, first you list, I like to list labor and then materials and then equipment, inside that division. But pick what makes sense to you and just keep it consistent throughout the template that you're creating here. All right, number 3 is cost codes. Even if you're not planning on getting into cost codes and like coding everything and doing job costing right now because it's a big thing to take on and get into place. But if you're building out a template, you may as well get cost codes in place so that later on you can always refer back to these estimates that you're doing. It keeps things more structured. Typically speaking, if you're using project management software, they will already have these codes in there, hopefully, or you can load them in. Reach out to us if you need help with any of this or extracurricular type of stuff to get done in your business. Again, links in the description. So once you have those cost codes in place, you need to pretty much delete a bunch of stuff off the list. So you want to simplify your cost code structure. You definitely don't need all of them. And when you're going through them, you're like, oh, I might use that. Don't worry about it. You can always add more later. But essentially, the big thing is your kind of divisions. You should have maybe a labor and a materials, and that's probably about it per division, maybe equipment. You might break it down to subcontractors, but typically speaking, you only need 20 to 30 cost codes to get started as a general contractor, and that's probably enough. You don't need extra ones, even though it might feel good to be more detailed with it. The cost codes aren't about getting detailed with the scope of work. It's about doing job costing later, and you don't need to know job costing down to the plywood sheet or the nail or anything as specific as that. You really just need the big division. Did we go over on framing materials, or were we under? Were we over on framing labor or under, right? That's the kind of things that you need from the cost codes. You don't need to know all the little, minor details that you can get with all these different cost codes. So making sense so far? All right, moving on to number 4 is pricing. So pricing, super essential, important to get on a template. And you may be thinking that I want a template that just has all the pricing in there so I can just, do my takeoffs, throw my numbers in, and just, have it all done within a very short period of time. That is great. And you can kind of get partially there, but I would suggest not putting in too much detailed pricing because prices will change and it'll get outdated over time. So things like labor pricing, any kind of like really standard kind of stuff, if you have a project management platform that has dynamic pricing, so it's always pulling from your cost database or from live pricing from, suppliers and things like that, fantastic. Put your pricing in there. It's pulling in live pricing. You know it's going to be accurate. Typically speaking, though, a lot of the time, this isn't typically possible. And if it's not, then just be a little bit limited with the pricing so that whoever's running these, even if it's yourself, you kind of force yourself to go and check the pricing as needed or check the cost database to make sure the pricing is accurate. I also like to put in pricing as like a rough or standard type pricing. So things like per plumbing fixture for labor, that kind of pricing, you put it in there, or electrical per disc light, pot light, whatever you want to call it. Things like that where it's a very sort of standard price, and then have something later. I'm going to talk about notes and disclaimers, but have something in there so that people realize that, this may not be the final price or whatever it may be. As I mentioned, if you want to know how we don't have like super amounts of pricing because it's going to vary by, state, location, all this stuff. But check out the estimating templates we have in the description. It's a great basis. It's going to save you tons of hours getting this first template set up. And because it's a full home build template, you can pare it down to whatever essentially you need. And it's already got the structure. If you're doing remodels, even if you're doing commercial projects, you'll take a lot from that to then turn into a commercial project type template. All right, moving on to point number 5 in getting amazing templates set up. And this is notes. So you're going to need notes. You're going to need some sort of description. And this is one of the most time-saving things because you don't need to be typing in, all these descriptions for the different parts of the project. There should be some basic descriptions in there. And the kind of things you want to be thinking as far as descriptions go is any sort of calculations. So if you have a certain type of calculation that needs to get done, let's say for putting in insulation or whatever it may be, put the calculation in the internal notes. So usually you got an internal note and then you've got a description. So description, the client's going to see that. Internal notes is just for internal people who are running the estimate. But any kind of calculations are super handy in there when you've got to run them a bunch of times, or so that people know how to calculate that part of the project, especially for people starting out new. If you're training someone to estimate, and they're putting in like, how do I calculate framing labor for this, remodel or whatever, right? So in that internal notes, you can put in there, this is how you would calculate it. We've got, typically a crew of this many people and you want to times it by this and make sure you're accounting for setup and takedown and cleanup at the end of the day and how many days is it going to take. And if it lands on a half day, make it a full day or whatever, right? So put your internal notes in there for sure. And then have any risks in the description as well. So things like excavation, you never know kind of how much fill you're going to possibly need, or you may run into stuff underground. If you haven't done any sort of geotech engineering yet or anything like that, put in the description risk factor until this time, or this may change, whatever it may be. If you're running like a iterative estimating process where you've got like a rough budget that you give to the client, which I highly suggest, you're going to give them kind of quick and fast numbers, and that's what you want in your template. So you can just plug and play a lot of your takeoffs or just counts and stuff like that, send it over to the client, and it's like pretty detailed. And then from there you turn into a pre-construction agreement, and then you sort of do a detailed where you're getting quotes from suppliers, you're doing selections, you're getting, putting out for tender bids, with subcontractors and that kind of stuff. But essentially have good notes and have that all in the document so that every estimate is the same. Moving on to point number 6 here, that is protection. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure every proposal that goes out, every budget that you send is protected and that you are protected as a business. So have this in your template. You should have like a templated cover photo and proposal. And I talk about proposals in another video, so I'm not going to go over here. But essentially for protection, you want to mention the terms of the estimate, the proposal, whatever you want to call it. So how long is it good for, what standards and different things are you using, and mention all the terms. Then you want inclusion. So what is included? Labor, materials, warranty, all this kind of stuff, right? So have a list of inclusions. And then one of the most important parts is exclusions. You need the client to be very clear what's included, what's not included in the estimate so that it's not coming up later when you get into the project and they're saying like, well, you didn't write anything about this. I was assuming that it was included. And now it's kind of like you're at odds and who's going to foot the bill for this thing that wasn't discussed or wasn't specified in the estimate. So exclusions can be things like permits if you're not including permit pricing. It could be city, hookups and upgrades, things like that. A whole number of things could go in here. Any kind of remediation for asbestos or environmental concerns, whatever it may be, right? You want to have a pretty good list. You'll have a contract later that's going to be more built out, but you should have all your bases covered in the estimate and have that in your template. All right, moving on to point number 7 here. This is the big one. This is how do we make it better, right? This first one you're going to get in place is going to be great. It's going to save you a bunch of time, but it's probably going to be 80% to where it should be, right? So as far as improvement, every time you run an estimate, you should always be thinking in the back of your mind, if something on the estimate, on the template when you're making an estimate is out or should be worded differently, if you're changing something on the estimate before it goes to the client, think like, should I be changing this on the template? Is this a change that should happen for every future estimate that we're putting out? If it is, take the 5-10 minutes to go back to your template and modify your template so that every time you're running an estimate, you can improve your template and slowly it'll upgrade over time and really be an amazing asset to your company. Another thing is we've talked about getting that one big template, massive template for the biggest project that you have. You can now, let's say you've done a new home build and that's your big template and your standard, but you also do remodels and someone wants their whole first floor of their house remodeled or they want their kitchen remodeled. Well, you're going to have to build that estimate. So now take that template and create a kitchen template. So take out all the things that aren't to do with kitchens and pare it down and create a kitchen template and then use that template to estimate that project for the client. Yes, it's a little bit more work, but the next time someone asks, can you do a kitchen estimate for me? No problem. You've got it sitting on the shelf. Now you take that kitchen estimate and you just run, or kitchen template, and you just run with it to create the estimate. And I would say any project that you consider you may do a couple of during a year, you probably want a pretty good built out template for it. And then finally, do price checks. I would create a reoccurring task maybe every 3 months or so and just kind of revisit the template and do a price check. Are the prices accurate? Have we raised our labor rates? Have we, does the cost of lumber now 10% higher or 5% or whatever? And then just kind of make sure you're always updating the numbers and checking them every 3 months so that you're not stuck with old pricing and, not being profitable. So now that you know how to create amazing templates, the next step is to check out this other video that I've got coming up next. This is a series of, estimating mastery on doing takeoffs. So how do you do high level, quick, accurate, great takeoffs using takeoff software and what software to use? Go check out this other video now.